Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to Tomorrow Never Knows with myself, Bob Wilson, and Sir Warren Brown. Tonight, the return of Dr. Kit O'Toole. We'll be discussing the Beatles anthology projects. Oh, they were on the TV, they were on records, they were in books. The boys were just rolling in a pile of money on all different fronts. But we'll let the proceedings open now with Sir Warren delving into Kit's Beatle genius. Let's listen in.
First, I want to say hello, kid. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Warren, and hi, Bob. I'm really glad to be back.
Hello, hello.
Awesome. It's nice to have you back too. I love talking to you. I think you're a genius, and we'll go from
Well,
there.
thank you. Now I really like being on this show.
That's good. Then you'll be coming back then, correct?
You bet. Absolutely.
That's
Flattery will
good.
get you everywhere.
We love having you here. So.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as you know, I'm a graphic artist, and the first thing I want to ask is what is your thoughts on anthology album graphics and art?
Well, it's, of course, created by someone that I'm sure most listeners will be familiar with, Klaus Vormann, who was an art and is an artist and bass player, and the Beatles met him in Hamburg, and he ended up creating the Revolver album cover, which is just it is so cool. I mean, it's like a collage, and so wisely they had him do the artwork for the anthology albums, and it's another kind of collage. If you put all three of the albums together, like if you line them up, it's one big collage, like it's meant to be all one piece, which is so cool.
Y-
And it's one of those things where the more you look at it, the more details you're going to notice. you know
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so detailed, and I have to say, on a personal note, I one of my prized possessions in my collection is, I got a poster of the first anthology
Okay.
album. It came. I got it at the now defunct Borders when it first came out, and
Hmm.
they gave out a poster. For the first album to go along with it, and years later, I took it to the Fest for Beatles fans. Klaus was there, and he signed it.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I have it up in my office. It is one of my prized items in my collection. It was just a real thrill to meet him.
It would be my prized item too in my possession if I owned it. That's for sure. I,
Yeah, it's real.
I love Klaus Vorman, and of course, Revolver's my favorite album, and I love the album cover myself. I love his artwork. I think I like to get in his brain sometime. Um,
Yeah. Oh, I mean, he's got stories, just, I mean, what a life he's led. I mean, as an artist, and then of course playing bass, with John, and I mean, he just has such a remarkable life, but it's really great. And in fact, this just came to mind that just a couple of years ago, he put out a book about Revolver, and it was sort of like the making of it, and on like kind of a graphic, almost like a graphic novel. Is really
right.
cool.
Yeah.
So he keeps on keeping on.
That's a good thing. I'm not as old as him, and it's hard for me to keep on keeping on. So more power to him. So
That's sure.
I love to meet him one day. That would
Yeah.
be so great.
Hmm.
All right. I wanted to say something about the book, the anthology book.
Yes.
Um, it's got a bunch of pictures and artwork inside the book and all, and there are some pictures in there that were the unreleased pictures in there, and I always said to myself, I thought I'd seen these before earlier than the album and the book has actually came out. Can you say anything on that?
Well, and I don't have the book in front of me, but it was a mixture. It was a mixture of there were some stuff, some pictures in there we'd seen before. There were some, and not just pictures, but they had kind of these, it was sort of I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase it. I mean, just ephemera. They had all different, like their contracts and things like that. It
Right.
really it was just a nerd's delight. I mean, they had a bit of everything, and the only thing that really annoyed me about that book was that it came out. Anthology was 95,
Mm.
and the book didn't come out till 2000,
Hmm.
and I thought that was so weird.
Yeah.
Why didn't they strike while the iron was hot?
Didn't it come out about the same time as Anthology 3?
No, the Anthology
Really?
3 came out, I think that was 96.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that,
Wow.
yeah, because I think it was like, I think Anthology 1 came out in 95. Like, it was
Right.
like the weekend after the debut of, the documentary. And then I think the last two came out in 96.
Well,
The other two, yeah. Why they waited so long?
well, excuse me for being wrong on that.
Oh, no,
I
you would
didn't know the
think.
answer to that.
You would
That's
think you would think that's what would happen, and
right.
it was just strange that the book came out so long after the fact. It's great. I mean, it's sort of a companion to the documentary, and it's great, and it's got the Beatles in their own words, and it's certainly artistically interesting too. The layout is, I mean, they really pulled out all the stops.
Yeah, I thought the book was really good myself.
Yeah.
I only read parts of it. I didn't read the whole thing, but I thought it was really good.
It's one of those books that you don't really sit and read cover to cover. It's like you pick it
Right.
up and you read certain, which is great. I mean, that's a great way, particularly since there are so many pictures and all that. Yeah, you can just pick it up and if you want to read about a particular album or whatever,
Mm.
easy to do that.
My next question has to do with a friend of mine. He's a member of the Beatles Kingdom, Mr. Rogue Best.
Hmm.
And what did Anthology mean to the original drummer, Pete Best?
Well, it was interesting. First of all, financially, it was very good for Pete. He never specified. It must be the agreement they came to. He's never said how much he was paid,
Mm,
for the album sales and all that. But I think it was pretty good. I think he was, and fair enough. I think I was glad to see him, uh, you know, not only financially compensated, but also, getting, some renewed attention because, whatever you think of his drumming skills, and that's debated to this day,
uh-huh.
um, he was there, at the beginning. I mean, he was there in the hard years,
Yep.
and he's got, he's a part of the history of the band and needs to be heard. I've met him. I met him once, and he was a really nice guy. He was at another Fest for Beatles fans,
Mm,
and very humble guy, and it's just it's a shame how it ended that they
mm,
didn't fire them, quotes, fire 'em themselves. I mean, that
mm.
had to hurt. I mean, I can't imagine.
Neither can I.
Mm.
You keep on bringing up Beatles Fest. I go to the one in New York every so often.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and I want to know which one you go to. Is it the one in Chicago or?
I actually go to both now. I used to go
Oh,
to just the
wow,
one in Chicago, but yep, now I go to both, and I have a table set up. I do presentations there. So yeah, you
wow.
gotta come back.
Yeah, I'm going to the next one. So
Excellent. I'll
hopefully,
be there.
awesome. Then I'll get to meet you in person. That
That'd be Great.
That would be awesome for me.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love that.
I'd be reaching heaven's gates for me.
Oh God, I love this show. All right.
I love talking to you, Kid.
Uh,
You are very interesting, very knowledgeable, and informative. You're the best.
Thank you. That is so sweet of you. Thank
Y-
you.
You're welcome. What did you make about the footage of John in Anthology? And was he well represented?
It was must have been so hard for the filmmakers because they could only work with so much footage. I mean, they of course, I mean, they did have some archival interviews from when he was with the Beatles, and then I'm trying to remember if they played any of like the Dick Cavett interview. I'm sure they did, and some other like kind of odds and ends. But it was interesting. I was I don't remember if I mentioned this in the last show, but I presented at a conference in Rochester, New York. It was the 50th anniversary of Abbey Road. It was celebrating that, and at one point, one of the speakers was talking about how it's such a shame that what we hear from John are with the archival interviews, they're the opinions of a 20-year-old and 30-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
and I think as you grow older, your opinions change. I mean, I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
if you compared an interview Paul did from 1971 or something, and
Right.
then today, it would be very different.
Eh,
I mean, he has a completely different perspective.
Paul in his early days and Paul now, his interviews are completely different, and that's
Exactly.
something we missed out on, John. That's for sure.
Exactly. So, it's just I mean, of course, nobody can do anything about it, but it was just a shame that, that they had to do that because, we'll never know, obviously, what he would have thought, as he grew older. I mean, you like to think like the Rolling Stone interview he did in the early 70s where he was, fresh off the breakup of the Beatles and all, and he was really angry,
Hmm.
and in subsequent interviews, I think he kind of backed off on a lot of what he said. And you just think that maybe, as the years had gone on, he may have mellowed out a bit and not been
Exactly.
as angry. And, and then, yeah, we don't have that. So they
Hmm.
represented him as best they could
Yes,
with what
I
they had to work with.
I agree. Well, I thank you very much for answering a couple of my questions,
Oh, of
and
course.
I'm going to hand it over to the bulldog, my friend Bob Wilson.
Oh my, is this Kit Warren? This is Bob Wilson had to go take a little bathroom break, so he put me here in his seat. I'm sitting on a phone book and speaking into his microphone. But know, do you know where Maharishi goes when he wants to learn all things Beatles?
Hmm.
Do you know what? When I sit at the Maharishi internet and look, what I search when I want to find pictures, photos, articles, and all different kind of things Beatles?
I believe you would go see Lovely Rita.
Lovely Rita, you say that's exactly where I go. Do you know her, Kit?
Yes, I do. The lovely Rita in Beatles magazine.
Awesome.
Lovely Rita and Beatles magazine. Now Bob is picking me up and taking me out of this chair like I'm Yoda, and I say good night to you. But go to Beatles magazine for all lovely things, Beatles and all kinds of things. He's pulling me away. I have to go. Back to the regular schedule.
Okay. That's
Yeah, that's funny.
How long were the Beatles, Kit? How long was this a concept where they had broken up and they wanted more money, and they said we have to do a documentary?
Well,
Who started this business?
yeah, it actually dates back and in fact before we were we went on the air, I did a little research to kind of refresh my memory on the time frame and everything. So it was Neil Aspinall. This started out as his baby. And it goes back as far as even 1968. He was collecting all kinds of film, all kinds of footage and photos and everything. And you would think, well, wait a minute, wouldn't they have all that stuff? Well, not necessarily. And so he was doing that, digging up all this footage. And remember, of course, around 1968, the Hunter Davies biography came out, and that was back then as close to like the Beatles telling their own story as you were going to get. But they obviously decided to take a step beyond that. So Neil was working on this, and it was supposed to be called The Long and Winding Road. And well, then of course they break up, and then there's all the fighting, and and then Paul eventually said, I'm out of this. I don't want any part of this project. And then I think there was some interest in reviving it in like the late 70s. And then, of course, John passes away. And so that kind of, for years put an end to that. But then, of course, fast forward to the early 90s, and we get to Anthology. Now, I'm not sure, when the name change occurred and, whose idea that was, but that's, and so Neil was involved in this. He was involved in Anthology. And it's interesting. Apparently, there are some bootlegs out there. I do not have it. I can't tell you where to get it. But it's the
What are you,
footage.
afraid of a lawsuit?
Yeah, right.
She doesn't know anything about it, folks.
Yeah,
She's
right.
never seen it.
I don't have it. I've just heard of it. So I am completely innocent. But but it's footage that apparently Neil Aspinall put together as sort of like a kind of a test. I mean, like to present to the Beatles to say this is and potential, I think, studios and all, like this is what it would look like. And I guess there is some a bootleg out there of Neil, the stuff that Neil put together. It's not great from what I've read. I mean, it's because again, it's a very, very rough draft, and he just wanted to show like this is how I would approach it, but it does exist out there. But obviously
you haven't seen it, touched it, distributed, or in any way.
Absolutely not. I swear to God, I haven't.
Because piracy is a crime. You're a nervous person when it comes to litigious things.
That's right. Oh my God. Nope. I swear to God, I've heard of this. I don't have it in my possession or
Please
anything.
Remember, you're still under oath.
That's
don't let him trick you into it.
I know. I have my lawyer sitting next to me right now.
That's a good thing.
Now, when the Beatles were coming up with the new songs in this project, they needed John's voice. So who do you go to for John's voice but the queen of all things, John, Yoko?
Right.
And she had demos, but I always like to get into what I'm really thinking, and like she gave up demos for the production, and they said there were better quality demos that she hid at the time. But actually, I'm just glad she let the whole project come to fruition. Because there's been nothing that stood in the way of a Beatles reunion more than Yoko, 1974 Venus and Mars album and all that stuff. But can you tell us a little bit, after I express my bitterness at her blocking the Beatles reunion, and I get that out because you are a doctor and I do need my Anthology therapy to continue. I'm breathing in the dirty air and breathing out the clean air or whatever.
Just wait until you get the bill, Bob.
As long as the clean air comes out and I get a Beatles reunion.
God.
But tell us about these demos. What was she clinging to, and how did she decide on the ones that she released? Well, John on the other. Meanwhile, she's got like 500 songs where he's like supposedly singing like a bird. I now turn it over to your answer. Ending my frustration.
Yeah, well, and I wish I had more of the inside track about this, and I don't. I can just say, of course, it was interesting at first. I think John or George, Paul, and Ringo were thinking about just recording, sort of instrumental music to use in the documentary. And I think they were finally told, look, it'd be much better and quite frankly more profitable if lucrative if they were recorded new songs. So obviously they didn't want to do it without John, somehow. So that's when Yoko was approached. They and she, I mean, I don't get the sense that she objected in any way. I mean, I think she was on board with the idea. And so at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremonies in '94, and I believe this is when John was inducted, Paul was inducting him, Yoko brought these cassettes, and she brought 4 demos: Free as a Bird, Real Love, Now and Then, and Grow Old With Me. Now, just to digress just for a second here, it's really strange how Ringo, in fact, as we're recording this, his album just dropped today, and he recorded a version of Grow Old With Me, and he claimed he had never heard of it or anything until the song. Yeah, right. Until the song was played for him like a year ago or something. Well, I've looked in different places. I'm like, I thought that was one of the songs that Yoko presented to them for possible recording. Now, maybe he just never heard it. Maybe
there were demos released of that song. I mean, I thought we've heard that for years. No?
Yeah. So
to Ringo, peace and love.
Yeah, right. And we love Ringo. We love Ringo, but yeah, that part's really been confusing. But in any case, so back to the topic at hand. So yeah,
I love to digress. I'm sorry.
Oh, good. No, good. Oh, good. I'm good at digressing. So anyway, yeah. So Yoko presented them. Now, the whole thing about were there better quality demos, that I can't tell you. I don't know, and I know that they had a hard time. Jeff Lynne, I should say, had a hard time working with the demos because and you can hear it when you hear the original ones. You can hear like a hissing in the background. I mean, it was a tape recorder. So it was definitely not high quality. And so it was a real challenge. I think today, with the tools we have now, with Pro Tools and all that, I bet Jeff Lynne could have cleaned it up more today, but, back in the early 90s, the technology wasn't quite there yet. Some of it was.
Can I jump in here for a second? I want to ask you real quick. Since you're talking about Jeff Lennon of ELO, was George Martin having hearing issues or something at the time, and Jeff took his place, or what happened there?
Paul wanted George Martin to do it, and George begged off of it and said, my hearing isn't that great, and I wouldn't feel comfortable. I also wonder, maybe he just didn't want the pressure. I mean, it's to then have George Martin come back and produce some. I mean, talk about sky high expectations. Right. I mean that. And so George, as we all know, was good friends with Jeff Lynne and had worked with him. And so he recommended, he really pushed for Jeff and said, he's, first of all, of course, George knew him really well. ELO stuff is Beatlesque. A lot of it is. I think Jeff Lynne worshipped the Beatles. And so, he really would handle it with their music with reverence, and so ultimately Paul then agreed to it, and then Paul ended up working with him on Flaming Pie. He produced some, so it all kind of worked out. But yeah, Paul wanted George Martin, and George said he wasn't confident in his hearing.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Sure.
Sorry about that, Bulldog. It's all yours.
In your last podcast, Kate, you brought up the song Sunshine Life from Me, San Luis Raymond. You were talking about cowboy songs or country music.
Yeah.
The kid used for it. That was a good show, but I like that song, Sunshine Life from Me. And,
it's
go on. Yeah, tell us about that sunshine business. I love it.
Yeah, it's really, I agree. It's a beautiful, beautiful track. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's, a ton to say about it other than just, of course, George wrote it for him. And I just think, George had such a feeling for country. I wish he had recorded more of it. And All Things Must Pass. There are definitely some country leaning songs there. And so, yeah, he wrote that for Ringo. And, it's interesting. I did hear this during our Talk More Talk show where we talked about country music, but I've had other people say they think it's a silly, trite kind of song.
Oh, no.
And I think that's ridiculous. I think it fits Ringo. It fits his personality. I think Ringo's voice sounds great on it because, again, we love Ringo. We love you, Ringo. But,
Peace and love.
Yeah, that's right. Peace and love. We're all about that. But, his voice is limited. I'm just going to put it out there, And so George, I think, knew how to write for him and in his range. So, so Sunshine Life for Me was just, I think, a perfect vehicle for him. And it's just got that great country, sort of, good old fiddle, and I just I love that track, and thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, our last show we talked about the country influences on the Beatles as a group and then as solo artists.
It's an excellent show. Where can the kids go to watch a replay of that?
They can go either on our YouTube channel. You can find us on Facebook and watch it there, or it is on virtually any, like just the audio, virtually any podcasting platform you can think of, iTunes, the whole bit. So you can find us.
Well, as we brought up Sunshine Life for Me, what's occurring to me is I love to digress. It's what I do best is take us off track.
Sure.
But that Ringo album, like if you want to talk about a Beatles reunion, I'm very frustrated in general, but also about the Beatles. But with the Ringo album, that really was, in my mind, the closest thing to a reunion. Even though Ringo is the only one really singing the lead on the songs, it's his album. But you had like basically the Beatles on there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Anthology as a reunion, but I mean, this was kind of more of a reunion 3 years after they broke up than Anthology was. Am I incorrect?
No, that's true. I mean, as you said, obviously Ringo was the star. I mean, he was singing lead, but yeah, all the other three all wrote songs for him. And then in the case of Sunshine Life for Me, George sang backup. You can definitely hear him on that track, and also played guitar. And yeah, I mean, I think it does give you somewhat of an idea of, wonder, what kind of stuff would they have been recording, had they not broken up. And so, yeah. And by the way, I mean, I think that's one of the best solo albums, period. I just think Ringo, it still stands up. It's just such a solid album of, pop and rock and just, I mean, Paul and John and George's contributions they're all good. And
it's been, I think if not my favorite, it's in my top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I mean, from that album. But I want to be a little sarcastic because, George wrote Sunshine, and with Anthology, I like to call him Sunshine George.
Yeah.
Because, like I was just thinking this week of things, and I was just like, George, when I think of Anthology, we really needed a Beatles proctologist to remove whatever was between his cheeks. I'm just thinking they got together to play it, right? So you have like a tens of $1 million project going on, I would assume, between that big fat book and you got the 3 double CDs, you got A Beatles C, Dana Carvey show, and all this stuff going on. It's all exciting. But I mean, they're thinking. I know I went off on this one last time, and I showed my own long-standing bitterness. But when I'm watching that show and he comes out and Paul's like ready to play anything, and Ringo's got the sticks and he's ready to do anything. How did they wind up, singing a furniture commercial? Like I'm picturing that show. It's like, hey George, what do you want? Remember when we were young in Liverpool? There was a furniture store. Yeah, Paul, that's a great story. Remember that one? Thinking of Lincoln. Oh yeah, I remember that. I'm thinking of linking my life with you, and that was the only verse. I'm like, this is like $90 million. Cecil B. DeMille put less energy and money into his productions, and these idiots are sitting there on camera debating a furniture song to sing. What's going on here? I mean, I still can't figure it out.
Well,
From my couch as your Dr. Kit, and I'm the patient.
well, I'll tell you, that is an undercurrent of the whole documentary, isn't it? Like you can see, George was definitely going through something then, and I think, I think it was a combination of things. I think he was, he felt, and with some justification, he felt slighted that
Hatred?
yeah, right. I mean,
I definitely sensed a little, not so much peace and love. I felt a little hatred.
yeah, I mean, he was definitely, I mean, he was bitter, and I think it's still smarted that even though with, Abbey Road, of course, I mean, his songs are, I mean, all the songs are great, but the two of that, Something and Here Comes the Sun, I mean, those are just not only some of the best songs George wrote, but I mean, some of the best songs in rock, period. And, he felt that he deserved to be thought of on the same level as Lennon, McCartney. And, Paul, and I think Paul even still says this in interviews, he'll make a big point of saying, oh, George is my little brother. He's, and made a big point of saying, how young, much younger he was and all. And I guess George was just.
Yeah, well, Paul was like 30 when they started, and George was like 12.
Yeah. And so I think that's part of what was going on. I've also heard a lot of rumors about George, like, did he really want to do Anthology, or was it just for the money? And I'm sure, I don't know if it was completely, but was the money the one of the motivators, shall we say? Sure. I mean, it's how can I can't blame him. There was a lot of money involved in that, and so so I don't know how enthusiastic he was anyway.
I know how enthusiastic he was. They were thinking of furniture commercial.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of the scenes where they were sitting. I think it was George's estate. I think they were sitting, outside and just sitting under a tree or something. And George is, picking away on a ukulele, and Paul is saying to him, "Hey, George, you remember when?" And I don't know what what he was trying to remind him of. Remember when, so and so happened? And George just kept playing the ukulele, and Paul's like, "Guess not." I mean, he just thought, "Oh, I mean, there's still some, some tension there."
But I mean, like, they were gonna also possibly re-record "Let It Be," and like my thing is like, well, that's a Paul song, and I want to get into "Let It Be" a little because I like to digress. But "Let It Be," like when you look at that project, the movie I can't even watch. It's just like from the first time I saw it, it was like brutally boring, and it was just painful. And it's just the songs Paul wrote though for that one were really good. Like "The Two of Us," I think is a really good song.
Yeah.
"Let It Be" is a masterpiece. "The Long and Winding Road" maybe a little less than "Let It Be," but I mean that's like a standard song. It's like he was still putting his pedal to the metal there.
Sure.
And things that came out of that, for the most part, it seemed like Paul had another. That was, if everybody'd been on board for that, and it happened under different circumstances, and George Martin had been there. In the great mind of Dr. Kit O'Toole, how would you envision that project possibly being different if George Martin had, that's his name, Marston, right? He's a Martian. George Martian, and then like they had made "Let It Be" with him.
Yeah.
And and they weren't all ready to kill each other, and they weren't recording at like 8 in the morning in a warehouse.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, well, one way you can kind of get an idea is if you go back to the soundtrack for Give My Regards to Broad Street when, George Martin produced that and they ended up, re-recording Long and Winding Road and I think For No One, I think that was another one, and there were, a couple others. And yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting because I like Jeff Lynne. I really, and ELO's great. I saw him in concert, a couple of years ago. Fantastic. But Jeff Lynne has a very distinctive sound. I mean, he's one of those producers that, I mean, I can hear the first drum, the drum hit, and I'm like, that's Jeff Lynne. I mean, it's just he has a very distinctive sound, and that carried over to me into Free as a Bird and Real Love. I mean, to me they're good enough, but they sounded. I mean, I could hear Jeff Lynne all over the place on those songs. Would have been interesting to see, if George Martin's hearing had been okay and he felt comfortable. It'd be interesting to think about like what he could have done with those songs, because I think he would have taken, he would have taken a very different approach. And not as much reverb on the drums and things like that. And again, nothing against Jeff Lynne. It's just he just has a very distinctive producing style, and it definitely was front and center on those two tracks.
Well, on Cloud 9, I think, and if I have to sit down and listen to a George album, I'm going to pick Cloud 9 for that reason.
Yeah.
It's
yep.
easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love.
You can expound now. I'm leaving time for you to expound.
I love Cloud 9. I mean, that's that is great, and that's one case where, yeah, I mean, Jeff production, was great on that, and really, I think did a nice job of, keeping George's essential sound, but updating it for the 80s, but not in a sort of artificial way. I mean, if they had asked George to start rapping or something, I mean, that would have been ridiculous. But the production was, modern and everything, and so, it fit him well. So absolutely, Cloud 9, I completely agree. That was a great album. But yeah, I mean, I think Jeff did the best he could with, what he had with those demos, the sound quality of them. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about, if they had
I'd like
been
to see them pick up the songs with Paul and George since they get on board at this point, and and picked up that one they didn't finish maybe now.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now and then, that's a beautiful song. I think it's a shame that never really came to anything. It's haunting. It's such a beautiful song. I heard that they did start work on it. They started working on it, and that George just wasn't feeling it for some reason. He just didn't really care for. Yeah, right. I knew you would be. He just didn't care for the song, or Paul talked about that later on, that he also felt that there'd be too much. They'd have to do too much work on it. That because I think like with Free as a Bird, almost all the lyrics were there already. I think they just had to, Paul and George added, the bridge, some lyrics to the bridge, but that was about it. And Now and Then had that, there were some parts of it that you could hear like, yeah, that would need a bit more, work. But I didn't dislike it as much as George did. I think it's a beautiful song.
No, for what it is, I like all those songs. I got a lot of pleasure out of them.
Yeah.
Kit, do you know who saved our show this week?
Why, I don't know, Bob.
Why, Warren Brown did. Do you know that he was up trying to figure out the new technology and how that the kids understand so well, and I don't, that I was of no practical use whatsoever, only to keep him company and probably annoying him as he worked through all this new computer stuff to get us on this recording method and do these things. And I was of no use whatsoever, and he was up to like 4:05 every morning and then getting up for work at 4 a.m. So you got negative 5 minutes sleep. So that's why we're so cranky, and that's why I was living in the business before. But without Warren, there would have been no show. So he took us to this new level, of which I was of no practical use, and I know everyone can find that easy to believe. And now we hand over to our technical guru, Warren Brown.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. I have put in a lot of hard work and long hours to get everything up and going, and I appreciate it, Bob.
We couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you.
You did a
Thank
great
you.
job. You didn't give up.
Thank you. And no, you give me an inspiration, Kit. So
Thank you.
it's talking to people like you that make me want to do better.
Oh, that's very sweet.
I appreciate everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a learning experience.
Oh, good.
All right, I have a couple of questions. 1995, when the Beatles were working on Anthology, Yoko and McCartney recorded a piece called Hiroshima, Sky is Always Blue.
Yes.
Yoko provided the vocals, McCartney played the bass, Sean Lennon was on there, Linda McCartney, McCartney's children's played on the song also. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sure what they played, but they were on it. And
Right.
it was released as a broadcast for the 50th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that a little?
Well, I just think that was really representative of how, that I think after all the fighting and the lawsuits and all that went on, and particularly the 70s, and yeah, and into the 80s, because of course Paul didn't attend when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremonies when the Beatles were inducted. They were all still fighting at that point.
Mm,
And so to me, that really was so symbolic of, I think, by the early to mid 90s, there was a thought of, look, this is silly,
mm,
and they had kind of resolved all the business, or at least a lot of the business stuff. And so it was really, I remember, when I heard about that, and I just thought, wow, I mean, Paul and Yoko working on a track together. I mean,
mm-hmm,
in the 70s and 80s, I mean, I couldn't have imagined,
mm-hmm,
hearing anything like that. And so it really was like another, signal that things were changing, that I think that the group thought, look, we've been through all this stuff, and
mm-hmm,
time to move on, and time to just celebrate our legacy and what we did. And so it was, I thought that was a nice gesture,
mm-hmm.
for Paul and the family to do that, and for Yoko and Sean to create this. And so, as I said, that was another example where I just thought, I think the tide's turning here, that
Right.
that maybe we're not going to hear any more of, to paraphrase George, "Sue me, sue you" blues.
All right. The track Carnival of Light.
Oh
Um,
yes.
and that was recorded during Pepper sessions.
Hmm.
It was intended to be released on Anthology 2, I believe, um, but was voted off by George Harrison. Any reason why he didn't want that on there?
I think it was partially embarrassment, because from what I've heard, I mean, I know nobody's heard this except Mark Lewison.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing some talk he gave where somebody asked him about it, and he has heard it. He because
Hmm.
he got to go in Abbey Road and listen to all these, things that we can't even imagine what he
Right.
heard. And he's like, yes, I've heard it, and he's like, and you're not missing anything by not hearing it. He said it was just kind of them, fooling around in the studio, and it was, I mean, and I'm sure they were all, it sounds like they were all pretty high, and I
Hmm.
think it, Paul has tried to spin it that it was this great avant-garde piece of work. And from what I've heard from Mark Lewison, he's like, yeah, he said, nah, I wouldn't call it that, and so I
Hmm.
wonder if George, because I think I may be wrong here, but I think George was also for years against re-releasing the Let It Be film,
Hmm.
because of that, he felt he wasn't exactly shown in the best light in that in that
Hmm.
movie. And I'm wondering if it's kind of the same thing here, that he just thought, this is just something, some screwing around the studio we were doing, and I don't want that, out to the public. Now,
Hmm.
us Beatles nerds, we want to hear it, even if it is bad. I mean,
Right.
it's become like this legend, like this
Hmm.
urban legend, that there's this unbelievable recording, and I hope someday they'll just bite the bullet and just release it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's getting a little silly that they keep teasing us with it, and then they refuse to release it. Like, oh, just do it, even if it's bad. I mean, come on.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're always looking for something new. So, yeah,
And
that would be nice.
well, and actually, as we're saying this, I remember in the '90s when they were working on Anthology, and George Martin was interviewed, because he oversaw the three albums, and he was just mystified as to why people wanted to hear outtakes and
Mm-hmm.
different versions. He really was. I mean, said that in a few interviews, like, I don't know why, people are so, why they want to hear this stuff. It's just outtakes and everything. Well, I mean, that's part of being a fan. You want to hear how songs were recorded. And even if they, an outtake didn't sound great,
Mm-hmm.
you still want to know. It's like wanting to know how, a painting was created, or anything. And so it was just interesting. George Martin was just kind of like, well, okay, this will sell albums, and if people want to hear it, fine, okay. But yeah, he wasn't completely on board with it,
Awesome.
unfortunately. Yeah,
Good answer. Thank you.
sure.
Um, it was reported that McCartney, Harrison, and Starr worked on a new composition called All for Love in March 1995. That was intended to go on Anthology 3, I believe, correct?
Yes, and it actually, that is Now and Then. It is also known by that title that you just
Oh, I
mentioned. It's been
didn't
called.
know that.
Yeah, I didn't
Okay.
know this until recently, to be honest with you. I was
Uh,
looking it up too. And yeah, it's been called three different things. I don't know why, why it's but yeah, as I said, I think Now and Then is a beautiful song. It's really haunting. I'm
mhm.
wondering if because supposedly George, poor George, I love George Harrison. I'm not trying to pick on him at all. I mean, I'm
I
just,
am.
yeah, I know you are, Bob. I know you are, but I'm not picking on the guy at all. But I don't know if he thought maybe it sounded, and it did seem like a very personal kind of song. I mean, when you listen to the lyrics, and it does have a kind of intimate air to it. Maybe George, wasn't comfortable with that, or maybe just was, because I heard that the sessions for Free as a Bird and Real Love. Um, I mean, they went fine and everything, but I think there was still a bit of arguing, and that maybe George by that time just thought, forget it, we'll just do these two, and that's fine. But yeah, it's kind of a shame that they didn't continue work on Now and Then. I think it could have been a beautiful song.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I'll hand it back to the Bulldog.
All right.
Well, down in that time when those shows were airing, they had like, the ABC was really trying to ham it up, and they were doing the A Beatles C thing, and
Sure.
they had, like the Dana Carvey show. And the thing that's funny is I'm not that easily entertained by comedy,
Hmm.
and that show actually made me laugh out loud a few times. Like that's a skit where the guy who has the talk show on Channel Two now, everybody knows, but his name escapes me. He took over for David Letterman. He was on the show, and he
Hmm.
was playing George, and he said like they were just doing like outtakes from Anthology, and he goes like I was in the studio, and one of the gophers annoyed me, and I had him killed, but the record company took care of it, and it all went away. And then like they cut to the next segment, it's like how this guy is supposed to be Ringo with this big shellac beard, and
Yep.
then you wait to say something, and he starts snoring. And I thought it was really funny. The first episode, they had a thing in the New York Daily News. He said it was like the worst show that ever aired or something. And I thought it was
Really?
really funny. And it was like they made 10 episodes and only 7 of them aired. But do you remember that show? And what did you think? I just thought it tied in with that. And no
Yeah,
one
and
talked about it much.
and I remember that Dana Carvey had his own show for a time. And when you mentioned it to me earlier, yeah, I went online and looked it up because I'd completely forgotten, that he did do like this takeoff on Anthology. And yeah, and Dana Carvey's impersonation of Paul is really funny. I mean, it's because Paul, and we love Paul too, and no, nothing gets, but Paul can be, in his answers sometimes. I mean, not as much now, but in the past could be a little spacey, maybe. I don't know how else to
Well,
put
he's
it.
like 94 years old now, isn't he? I
Yeah,
mean,
right. I mean,
he looks
he's like
better
more
than most people at 30, but I mean, he's like
exactly.
94.
Oh, absolutely. But it's hard to describe. I mean, like there's, he would sometimes kind of go off on a tangent or so. I mean, it's so hard to describe. But Dana Carvey nailed it. I mean, it was,
Mhm.
yeah, sure, it's a little exaggerated, but it was really funny. And I think it was Stephen Colbert playing George.
That's
I'm
the
not.
fellow whose name that I couldn't remember
Yeah,
because I hung
Uh-huh.
that up on this current pop culture.
I would, well, I was shocked when I saw a clip. I mean, I would never have said, "Oh, that's Stephen Colbert." I mean, I mean, the makeup job, the voice he did. I mean, I was really
I
shocked.
call
And
him
yeah,
Stephen Colbert.
yeah, Colbert. There you go. And whoever played Ringo, yeah, that was funny too. It was just good natured humor. It wasn't anything
Mhm.
mean, but yeah, I didn't remember that it was so critically panned. So
Yeah,
wow.
they called it like pretty one of the worst shows ever, and I was laughing through the whole thing. I thought it was really good, so that tells you about
Mhm.
me. But
Yeah.
when these guys are doing this now, and like I listen to when Ringo talks, and you pick up the gist of what he's saying, and then Paul McCartney was obviously on board, and obviously I really wanted to see some kind of reunion. They started calling them the Threedles.
Oh yes.
So using something like that, I don't know if that was an official one or one the fans made up. I had like I heard a rumor on Kit's Lawyers here of a bootleg, saying it was called the Threedles. So it's only I didn't actually own it, I didn't actually hear it, and I can't get you a copy. Piracy is a crime, arg.
Yeah.
But and I was just wondering, like when these guys are together, um, so many people, and you write so many things and listen to so many things and so many interviews, and you have people who are allowed to walk into Abbey Road where I'd be clubbed like a baby seal for my fur. Like they can just go in and listen to Carnival of Light. I'm not allowed to walk
Yeah,
across
right.
Abbey Road without having the police trespass me. And tell me I'm jaywalking and have to be moved away. But I was just wondering, like they're playing at George Harrison's house, and at a time they got together at Clapton's wedding, and they
Hmm.
played. Do you ever hear any rumors, or was there a time when George didn't say short version when these guys actually might have played or done something? Like
Yeah, I'm trying to
what,
think because other
without
than
people mainly because that doesn't count.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean other than obviously Anthology. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was any other time that they all did that because I know well and this is, yeah, talking about bootlegs. You know, this one, okay, I know this one. Um,
Oh, guilty.
yeah, I am guilty as charged with this one. There is, I remember hearing that there was this incredible bootleg of John and Paul jamming in the studio with Stevie Wonder and I forget who all else. Maybe Harry Nilsson, he may have been there.
Chessia Davis,
Yeah,
and
and you
Nilsson,
just, yeah, and you're just
Stevie
like,
Wonder.
yep, and you just thought this is going to be awesome.
It was horrible.
It was horrible. I mean, I was so disappointed. I mean, I love, and the name of the bootleg is, of course, A Toot and a Snore in '74, and boy, is it. I mean, they were clearly, shall we say, in an altered state, and I mean, you just thought all this talent, and I mean, it just went nowhere. So, John and Paul, that, I mean, jammed a bit. I'm trying to think with George, if he really, I mean, other than of course playing on the Imagine album, um, yeah, I don't remember the three of them really jamming outside of
the Ringo album. That's about it.
Right? Yeah, right. Yeah, then Ringo's wedding and all. Yeah, I mean that's really that's all I can think of, and of course in George's case, I mean he didn't. He in the last 20 years of his life, I mean, he wasn't as active. I mean, he came out with a couple albums. He only did that tour in Japan. I wish he had brought it here, but and so he wasn't as active. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it. Um, yeah, I don't know. I wish
But I
they
mean,
had.
like what's the name of his house again? It's like something on the Thames.
Oh, oh my
Friar
God.
Park. I don't know.
Yeah,
Whatever.
yeah,
John's
Friar
house.
Park.
But
Yeah.
now all the Beatle fans are criticizing him. It's like when you say the White Album. Yeah, it's called the People. But when I look at his house, it costs a lot of money. And obviously they got together at times that we didn't know about. What I wonder about is that did they ever turn on a tape recorder?
Yeah.
I mean, like, there could be something. I believe, because I got to interview Gary Van Sciac, and this is a plug to have him come on the show because I got to interview him 2 or 3 times, and he was really nice from Elephant.
Oh, he's great.
Yeah, and he told me, like, they'd be in the studio and the phone would ring, and John Lennon would be on the phone with Paul McCartney, and in the media they were fighting, like, at each other's throats in the time period you had mentioned before.
Right.
And actually, they were talking to each other about family and this and that and the other thing, and it was like 2 brothers, and they were long conversations, he said. So the public fight, I don't know if some of that was for publicity or to get people past the Beatles in part, but, he said that they were really speaking to each other, so you wonder what was really going on behind the scenes sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I mean, as I said, I think a lot of it was just about the business. I think, like personally, particularly Paul and John. I think personally they were still, friends and everything. It was just it was just such a nasty bunch of, just a tangled mess with Alan Klein and I mean, it was just all the money, where was it going, the collapse of Apple. I mean, it was all that stuff. Because it was interesting. I remember, as I've been researching Abbey Road, the album Abbey Road, and for that conference I mentioned earlier, one of the things that came up was they said, that when the Beatles were in the studio, when they were, playing together and all the other crap went away. And they just focused on playing music, and they knew, of course, how good they were together. But once they stepped out of the studio and the phone starts ringing and they're meeting with lawyers and accountants and everything, that's when everything went to hell, because I mean it was just that. But so I think, like, personally, they never like hated each other. It was really, I think a lot of it was just about the business. And I think once they finally, resolved a lot of it, I think then, some of those tensions went away. But as you said, Bob, that's true that, that Paul and John weren't at each other's throats all the time. It was
Well,
just,
he was saying it was like so exact. He's like he couldn't believe they were on the phone. They were on the phone for hours, talking like brothers. Maybe hours is a little stretching it, but long periods of time. And he said,
yeah, right, right.
and the other thing
Yep.
I wanted to bring up for the anthology, which is what the show was initially about, but I strayed from all the time, I thought it was really funny when like they brought up like Elvis Presley, and they were talking about meeting him in
Yeah.
Hollywood. And do you want to tell that story? And then I wanted to ask you about when George met him at Madison Square Garden.
Well, you know what? This is a perfect example of one of the pitfalls you can fall into in making a documentary like this, because first of all, it's telling the story that the surviving Beatles wanted to be told. I mean, it's their version. I'm not saying they're lying or anything. It's just that they have a certain angle and all. The other thing is, of course, memories are faulty. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, some of that time they were in, again, shall we say, altered states. And so, their memories may not be the clearest. And so, yeah, when they talked about meeting Elvis, yeah, I remember them, like, they said they all fell when they got to the house. They all fell out of the car like it was a clown car. I could just picture that, like all them piling out of the
Like
car.
we were in the Beatles cartoons, falling out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could just picture it, and and it was weird because they all did seem to have like different versions of what happened. I mean, John insisted for years, I guess, that they jammed with him, and
Now, he just
Paul.
made that up, right?
Yeah,
That was
because then
just
I
people
think
wanted to
Paul.
hear.
Yeah, because Paul said something like, I think when he was asked about that, said something like, "Well, I must have been out of the room because that I didn't jam with Elvis," and so and I also think there was some disappointment in a way. I think that on the one hand that I mean, sure, it was Elvis Presley. I mean, he was a big part of how the Beatles became the Beatles. I mean, he inspired countless people. But I think when they met him, it wasn't, he was by that time, becoming really isolated, and it was, he was different, I think, than they thought he would be. And the one thing, though, I'll tell you, that really stuck out for me when they talked about that, and it's something that stuck out just in general in the whole anthology. I think it was George saying this, that when they met him, that even though he technically, Elvis, was not alone. I mean, he had people, in Graceland and around, but they were all yes men and and
Mhm.
employees. And whereas George said, people would ask, how did the Beatles not go insane, during the Beatlemania years when they were locked up in hotels? And he said it was because we had each other. He said we knew
Mhm.
what the other one was going through. And so we could really lean on each other. And he said Elvis didn't
Did you
really
say
have
wean on each other or lean on each other?
lean on each other,
I
lean on
thought this
each
was
other.
back to Paul's big headline last year. I'm sorry.
No, no, no,
I'm like, what is she talking about? What went on in those hotel rooms?
lean on each other.
Oh,
No,
all right.
no, no. And so, but yeah, I mean that, you know, he said Elvis didn't really have that.
Lean on me
Yeah,
when
lean
you're
on.
not. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I mean, really, it's that's the thing. And so George said that's kind of the one of the things that kept them from just going nuts when they were going through being mobbed and being locked in hotel rooms and all that. And and he said Elvis didn't have that. He really, other than yes men, he didn't really have anyone to that who would really support him and understood what he was going through. And that's one part of the anthology that has always stuck with me. Still remember it.
Now, Kit, I know that Warren and I have nothing to do after the show, so if Warren's thinking up some more questions to add to my limited itinerary, and I know you're the only one of us who might have a schedule, so I just really get more about Elvis. But I thought it was funny, and I guess part of it's not funny to them. But like we should get into why George was a little bitter at Elvis. But I thought it was funny when, they were all going, did you meet Elvis? Sean said he's playing the bass. That must have been in the basement. And then, like, and they were going, like, Ringo said, I saw him later in Vegas. And then, like, peace and love. And then, like, George was like, well, I saw him at Madison Square Garden in, like, 1972. And he had these shrieking background singers, and there were a few good songs. And I'm like, this is Elvis. Elvis hadn't, it was before the Elvis in Hawaii special. Elvis was still movie star looks, and, he's playing with James Burton and these guys. He's played with James Burton in quite a band, but he played the rock and roll. And, like, and why was George so there? I met him in the bathroom at Madison Square Garden. There were like 50 miles of toilets and urinals, and Elvis came out with this big Elvis belt buckle. And I was like, what a little hippie. And Elvis was at. But you want to talk about a little bit why George might have been a little ticked off at Elvis? I basically reported them as subversive.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Hunker, McCarthyism there. What's going on?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Elvis, I mean, the Beatles were a threat back in the day. I mean, I think, I've heard that, of course, we know when the Beatles debuted on Ed Sullivan that, at one point Ed Sullivan read this telegram from Colonel Parker saying, it was supposed to be from Elvis. But, I mean, Colonel Parker sent it. And, I mean, I'm sure Elvis, I mean, not that he hated them or anything, but I'm sure.
No, he just reported them as subversive.
Yeah, exactly. And well, exactly.
Well.
I mean, that's how scared he was of them. And I think, that's why, maybe there was always some tension when they met because, I mean, they were kind of stealing Elvis's thunder. And saying they were subversive and all. I mean, that just showed, how paranoid Elvis was and how
But they were broken up by that point. Like, he must have been reporting them right around the time George met him at the Madison Square Garden, because when he met Nixon, that was about 73. And they made movies about that, and they said you can read the actual transcript in the National Archives. I haven't flown over to do that yet. But, I mean, I don't think I'm planning on it anytime soon. But, I mean, Elvis wanted a badge. And when you look at pictures of Elvis in those pictures, Elvis was zonked out of his mind. I mean, he was on pink. Like, he had drugs in his system. Like, when he died, it's horrible, but he had, like, 16 drugs in his system.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Elvis fans love to hear this stuff. They sent hate letters to everybody, so this is Warren speaking. And, but, I felt bad for Elvis. Like, what George said, it did isolate him. But when he wanted to meet Nixon, he wanted to get a real drug enforcement badge. And I'll give these to Elvis down south. And he'd, like, pull people over, like, in the outfit.
Oh,
and I'd be like, hey, man, you're driving too fast. Maybe you better slow down. Like, they must be like, I think I have a brain tumor. Like, Elvis would jump back in the Corvette with his people and, like, speed away at probably 95 miles an hour.
Yeah, right.
And he had this collection of badges and guns and everything. But it's like a real bizarre scene to me, like, picturing, but at that point, John's politics, like, you want to just mention a little the difference between Elvis's viewpoint and John Lennon's viewpoint, I think, was the crux of the matter. Like, John was really out there at this point. He was
right.
Really, Gary Van Syak told me that, he was in his building, the FBI took up an apartment and were taping all of Gary Van Syak's phone calls.
Jeez.
And every time they left, they were being followed by the FBI. So, I mean, this is, like, semi-serious business. I mean, Elvis still would have gotten his badge, I think, if he, Mr. President, just give him the badge and take a picture. But, I mean, like, what was going on with John at that point?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And, it's just amazing when you think about it, because I remember reading when the FBI was watching John and Nixon wanted to get him kicked out of the country for being subversive. And, and I think John at the time when he was telling people, my phones are being tapped, I'm sure people thought, oh, come on. You're just being paranoid. Well, of course, we find out later, when the FBI files were released, they were tapping his phone. I mean, he was being followed. And I'm kind of mystified as to why, his politics were that alarming. I mean, okay, he was with some, I mean, he certainly
Well, he was
participated
running
for,
around with real radicals. I mean, Abby Hoffman and
yeah,
A.J. Weberman and Jerry Rubin, and he brought. I'm watching Mike Douglas with my mother, and I didn't mean to, cut in on you, but like,
no, no,
when I was a kid, Mike Douglas is on, and I used to like the Mike Douglas show and Merv Griffin and that stuff, but Yoko is, well, no, he came on with Yoko, and he brought out the Black Panthers. It's
yeah,
like
true.
it was like mind blowing. I was like a kid, and again, my image of the Beatles is something new. That's my favorite album. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like when I'm like, I guess in '74 I would have been about 8 years old, and I'm like sitting there watching Jerry Rubin come on with the Black Panthers, and Yoko is doing like macrobiotic cooking with the other guest Louis Nye, who was like a guest on the Munsters all the time, and like my little mind was blown. I'm like, how did it go from these guys in these nice suits and like, on the other side it's like these radicals. I mean, it's in one level it's kind of amusing, and then you got Elvis reporting them. You can't write this stuff.
No, and the thing with John too is that that was kind of, I mean, he was, I mean, he was still interested in politics and all for the rest of his life, but that was a phase that he kind of moved on from, because I think he figured
He was
out,
afraid for his life or something.
yeah, well, maybe, I mean,
They
that's,
had like the FBI files on him were extensive. It
yeah,
wasn't
they
like
were
3
really
files. There's a
serious.
lot of files on him. He was
Yeah,
being really watched.
yeah,
He went to the Watergate hearings and was sitting in the audience, and I'm sure Nixon wasn't saying, "Oh, look, that's one of the Beatles."
yeah, and
I'm pretty
and
sure it was like,
yeah,
Henry, write down that's Ringo.
yeah.
Get him.
Well, I guess,
I
from what
think that's John, Mr. President.
yeah. Oh man. Well, and from what I understand, I mean, Nixon was just terrified that, John was, of course, a public figure. People listened to him, and he was afraid that, John was going to lead all the youth astray and turn them against him and everything. And I mean,
Which he pretty much did.
yeah, true. He did to a point. He did to
I
a
mean,
point,
Nixon might have been paranoid in some people's eyes, but Lennon
Yep.
wasn't having many, polls for him at that
Yep.
point.
Yeah, really. But yeah, it's really it is interesting though. Going back to we're talking about Elvis.
I forget the original question.
I forget it too, but I
I
remember.
think I asked about Elvis and clam bacon. I went off on a tangent.
but it is interesting, and as I said, Anthology touches on this a bit about comparing the Beatles to Elvis. I mean, as we were saying, or you were saying, Bob, about how many drugs were found in the system when he died.
16.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's incredible. I mean,
like
whereas
Dilaudid and cancer. Like when you're in your last stages of cancer.
I mean
Unfortunate people. He was taking that on a daily basis at that point, I believe.
I mean, just incredible. Compare that to now, of course, the Beatles. I mean, they did drugs, but
Get out.
to say the least. But they remain though. I mean, relatively normal. I mean, it's amazing that they came through it the way they did. Now Ringo did have to, of course, go through rehab in the late '80s, and John, had bouts with heroin and all. So I'm not saying they were completely, completely healthy and everything, but when you compare them to what happened with Elvis, it is kind of amazing that that they survived like they did and pretty intact. It's just really interesting. But as I said earlier, that part of the anthology has always really stuck with me when George said how tight they were. That the Beatles were tight and they stuck together. They knew what the other one was going through, and that helped them, keep their sanity as things were going on. And Elvis didn't have that.
And it's a shame. I like Elvis. It's funny that it's a shame that they had to be in like a competition.
Exactly.
And they got insecure about it. I mean, like when you look at Bob Dylan, the guy was performing before John Kennedy was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, how many? He still like his last album in the studio, I think, was Tempest, and he's still playing shows like 6 months a year or something. But I mean, my God, like when you do anything, if you did it well for 5 years, whatever it is, like you're a writer and you're a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful writer. But could you imagine like people are still critiquing you and stuff if you've been doing it since like 1960?
Yeah.
And like Bob Dylan, like they're still, sometimes now they've given up. Now they got a Nobel Prize, I think, but they've
Mm-hmm.
been trying to write some of these guys off. Oh, McCartney's had it, He's been at it since like Eisenhower had hair. I mean, it's like how long do you have to do it before they finally say you're okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Right. Just yeah, it's just something you just can't we can't fathom, what it would be like to live in that world, and be constantly be a public figure and the whole thing and have your work judged. And yeah, I mean it's really I can't fathom it.
So I could see him get to Elvis's head and stuff. It's a shame.
Yeah, it
But I
really
love
is.
Elvis and those movies. Even the movies people make fun of, like I watched them when I was a kid, and
Mm.
they made me so happy. They brought me joy. So there had to be something in them. Like even when they gave him the worst of the movie songs,
Right.
there was still something. It was Elvis singing. It was still Elvis. It was
Yeah.
to me it was magical. But
Yeah.
on that note, I look over to my mate Warren Brown. He said plenty of times I've been rambling to take up some non-itinerary questions.
All right, I got one question, and I'll hand it back to you, Bob, and maybe we find out where we can find Kit on the internet. Um, even though Beatles got me into them very early on with their early songs, I like the later Beatles songs the best. To me, that's when they had it all together. They were creating different stuff, different sounds, and I enjoy that. The anthology one, two, and three are different parts of their history.
Hmm.
Like anthology one was the Quarrymen, and anthology two was like Help, Rubber Soul, and anthology three was the White Album, Let It Be, Abbey Road. Anthology three is my favorite for the reasons I previously mentioned.
Hmm.
Which is your favorite and why?
Ooh, that's really that is a tough question. Um, because I love the first anthology album because it's got some of the I'm fascinated, even though the Decca audition, I mean they obviously um didn't pass the audition.
Hmm.
It's not their best work, but I mean, but you hear them developing, and but I have to say I like the later stuff better. I love the early stuff too. Don't get me wrong, but the later stuff, like Abbey Road and Revolver, that's my number one favorite
Right. And
album.
that's mine too.
Yeah, I mean that was just and that was kind of well, and Rubber Soul too, because both of those are kind of the beginning of I call it the
Hmm.
Beatles 2.0.
Hmm.
When they were starting to get away from the early mop top image and all.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, I think probably I like the maybe the last anthology collection the best because it has stuff from Abbey Road, and of course now with the box set we have even more. But
Hmm.
back, I mean, just to okay, now it's my turn to digress a little bit. Um, but really going back to that time, um, it really was exciting to have this stuff finally available officially. I mean, um, I remember finding some of this on either buying bootlegs or a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy,
Hmm.
and And so it, was so great to hear, these were outtakes and all that I'd read about and heard about and or just had bits of. So to have them, officially released in decent sound quality,
Hmm.
this was big. I mean,
Yes,
it
it
was
was.
big deal. And for all three releases, I went to I got them like at midnight, the nights they were released.
Mm.
And it was so exciting. I mean, it was kind of like Beatlemania, like how I, kind of
Oh,
experiencing it. I mean, I was born in 72, so I, obviously didn't get to experience it firsthand, but it was cool to um, see, like, wow, this is what must have felt like, when a new Beatles
hmm.
album came out. And it was just such an exciting time. It
Hmm.
was so much fun. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember the first one, waiting, till midnight. And oh my God, I mean, we were just, I was with another fellow Beatle geek, and we were
Hmm.
just so excited. I mean, we were just like, wow, we're finally going to have all this stuff.
Hmm.
So, well, the third one might be my favorite. All three were just so, it was just such a thrilling time, to be a fan, to
Yeah.
finally have this stuff.
Yes, I agree, 100%. All right, Bulldog, back to you, and
Well, I'm just glad Kit was here, and I just want to ask her where can fans find all of your books, articles, and your podcast, which is wonderful, and all those different things. Where can they look for you?
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, which is at Kid O'Toole. You can check out my website, kidotoole.com. For the podcast, you can go to our page, which is Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast, and you can hit that like button while you're there, and then you'll be notified when we put a new episode up. We're on every other Monday, and so at 9 o'clock Eastern. And if you can't watch live, as I mentioned earlier, you can. We have a YouTube channel. We are on iTunes, Podbean. You can find us those places. So I think that's everything. I'll be coming back soon with my Deep Beatles column on Something Else Reviews, and so you can find that. So probably the best bet is to follow me on Facebook or Twitter, as I always put up, when I'm doing something, like on this show.
I know I follow you, Kit.
Mhm. Oh, thank you.
I think you're great.
Oh, thank you so much, Warren. I appreciate that.
And in the end, the love
Love
you
you
take
take
is
is
equal
equal to
to
the
the love
love
you
you
make.
make. Yeah, I don't know.
That's all right. I'm no good at this either, but
Yeah.
Bob insists me singing that, and I'm like, oh my God, I sound like a drunk old man
No, you don't.
sing, singing something I ain't never heard before. So anyway, that's the end, and it's a pleasure to talk to you always. So,
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and you were great.
thank you.